middle wall, please. I was hiding.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm here with Peter Moddel, author of what I think is fair to say is a groundbreaking book called Making Sense. And before I begin by asking Peter some questions about your book, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say that I feel that this is the book that I've been waiting my whole life to read. Not only does it make sense to me, but it's shown me a whole new way of understanding myself and the world. And as a result, my life is so much richer, more colourful. And I'd just like to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. That's a lot.
Before we go on to talk about what the book is about, I was wondering if perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your motivation which led to you writing this book.
The motivation, as with all things that I wrote and usually didn't publish, was to find to be faced with a problem of something I wanted to understand, where I didn't find an answer in the available literature. Here there was a question of the relationship between the structure of the mind and our way of understanding the world. And it came out of earlier interests in the development of ideas, from the mythic period to the period of literature and art to the modern period. And somehow there seemed to be something that wasn't being told in order for it all to cohere and make sense. And that was perhaps the... Go ahead.
You start the book with a deceptively simple question, which is, what do we need to know in order to be able to perceive an object? And then I think you give an example of a leaf. Now for most people, certainly like I was before, a leaf is a leaf. I mean, there may be different types and colours, but it's essentially a leaf. In other words, it's already there and we just add the word in order to be able to put a name to it and therefore refer to it. But am I right in thinking that this isn't actually how it works and that the object, in this case a leaf, isn't already there and instead we have some sort of role in forming the objects of our perception?
Very much, yes. And that role in forming the object is often overlooked. And the fact that we see a leaf doesn't start with the leaf as what you're pointing out there. There's a whole process that has to go on for all the aspects that make a leaf to integrate. And the fascinating part is, what is the integration? If we look at the integration from a neuroscience point of view, there are electrical impulses and other things going on. But why do they make one object that we see at one moment? We don't hear static of electrical buzzes in our head. We see a leaf or whatever else it is. So at a certain moment, it all came together and there was a realization of an object. And that is what fascinated me, and that's what is the opening of the book. Mm-hmm.
You go on to talk about the process of thinking, and you speak about two movements, an inward, which culminates in the object of thought and perception, like we were discussing the leaf, and then an outward movement away from that object of perception. And can you say a little bit about this movement?
Yes. It's good that you pick on these things, yes. But perhaps the simplest way is to say in the terms of what we just said of the object, of the formation of an object. The whole process of forming that object, we're oblivious of that. And we only become conscious at the moment the object appears to us. In other words, makes sense. And the question is, in what dimension of our being and of our biology is this whole process taking place that brings the realization of an object? And there was the little comment where I spoke about there's the moment when the object then we see a specific object, and behind that is the whole movement into all the significance that object has, that has to come together to form the object.
What is the difference between your description of what I think you refer to as the expanded mind, the part which is non-conscious that we're not aware of, and neurological activity which is going on in brains that doesn't register in our consciousness? because I think it's fair to say that psychology traditionally, or at least Western psychology, sees this other than conscious activity as very important, and it forms the basis of its work, whereby you're trying to bring out what is implicit and make it explicit to understand yourself better. But am I right in thinking that where traditional psychology sees this as necessarily limited to the individual, you're saying that it's not so limited and rather it's part of a deeper movement that effectively shapes everything that we perceive and experience in the world? Is that a fair question?
It's a fair question where you actually have sort of grasped the whole book in one go. Yes, and that's the idea of the beginning part, where there is the unconscious mind, which is functioning even when we don't know, and which has direction. If it didn't have direction, we wouldn't end up with any object of sense. So there is that on a personal level, and the whole question is, what is guiding that? What is the impulse that brings us to see the object we see? And that impulse has to do with intention. And that's a central part of the book, is how intention functions and what it is, and realizing that it's got nothing to do with the mind. It doesn't happen on the level of mind. And when you understand intention, then you can open it up to what you suggested in the end, which is maybe it's something more than I am as an individual, or anyone is, obviously. Mm-hmm.
So, back to this,
yes,
the
sure.
idea, central idea in your book of what you refer to as the expanded mind, which is beyond our effectively individual consciousness. Yes. Do we have any access to that other than the end product, which is what we consciously perceive? And if so, do feelings and sensations relate to that and feed into that process?
Oh, your questions are so central. It's wonderful. The expanded mind, yes, can it be understood by the conscious mind? And the answer is no. Mm. That's exactly the whole point, is that the moment something becomes conscious, we're no longer functioning in relationship to that object, in the expanded mind. And what is the expanded mind? It's something we know every day in all situations. It's the subliminal mind. Everything influences us. The sun, the glass house in which we are, all sorts of things are playing into our mood and what we're saying, and the way we behave, and a whole lot of other things. And so they are registering on me. So we can't say I'm not conscious of them, but I'm not conscious in the limited sense of conceptual consciousness, of mind consciousness. Mm. And there is this expanded kind of consciousness, which is the expanded mind functioning. Now, is there a second part of the question I didn't get to there?
No, I don't think so, but I think there's still something that...
Yes.
Whether we have... Is there an ability, is there a way in which we can gain greater access? Because it seems to me that there's a link between what you talk about, the expanded mind, and potential. And although it's not something we can grasp consciously as a concept, but is there a way that if we can have greater access to it, then we can release more of our own potential?
Yes, this question brings out the fact that all the ideas that I'm saying are not ideas. They're observations of how the mind works. And here the fact is that as soon as we want consciousness to recognize something, we have a linear sequence of one thing at a time. And so as soon as the moment the mind goes into a mode where it's thinking multiple things at one time, we can't be conscious of them. We're not capable of, consciousness is incapable of handling such situations. The interesting thing is that feelings are, and we can have multiple feelings come together. Even in taste, we can have multiple tastes that come together to form what what we taste. And this, on the level, as long as we don't enter into consciousness, we are capable of having this broader experience of relating meanings. But on that level, there also isn't the I which wakes up in consciousness, but that's a whole other direction.
Thank you. I think you say in the book that the conscious moments we experience, and which seem to us to be continuous, are actually not, and that between each is a sort of emptiness. And would it be fair to say that this is the source of meaning itself, or creativity, that lies within what our conscious mind would see as emptiness?
The fact that the emptiness comes about relative to consciousness. Consciousness if we trace what's happening, it's actually a momentary experience. If it continued, it would block the next moment of consciousness, and we'd have a mush of understanding. Yes, things would be overlapping.
Mm.
So consciousness is momentary. Then the question, we could even measure it in time, but that's another question. And so the between every moment of consciousness, there's something timeless that's there, or and it's in those moments between consciousness that the expanded mind, which is drawing all the meanings together, functions to produce the conscious object. Now, that moment of everything, your question, just the second part again?
Whether what our conscious mind may perceive, if you try and intellectualize it or conceptualize it as emptiness, whether that is the source from which we draw meaning and creativity.
So, if we're looking for what is creative in it, it's whatever is creating, whatever is bringing the things together that create the meaning. If we go back to the leaf, what makes me put the aspects that belong to the leaf together and leave out the ground around it and the bushes around it and all that, and the wasp that's it, or something that's passing by. In other words, there's a whole process that has a direction.
And is that direction? Sorry to.
Yes, good.
Is that when you were talking about intent? Does that relate to the bringing together the integration that gives you an actual thing at the end, a leaf or a wasp?
Right. Exactly, and it's in intention that we can look for the creative movement. Yes, it's your question that suggests that. I haven't thought about it deeply. Mm-hmm.
I think you say in the book that thought occupies the mind and may even disturb it, and that when something is experienced as pleasurable, the enjoyment is linked to the freedom of the mind to explore without being obliged to think about things consciously. And I was wondering, does this relate to the difference between the experience of thinking and the experience of awareness, and indeed whether there is a particular difference between those?
Thinking and awareness, these need definitions, yes, and often there's a lot of talk on this subject without having defined the terms, and for that reason the discussion doesn't get to a clear end. Actually, thinking is the conscious act of mind, what I call conceptual mind, and behind that is the expanded mind and the unconscious functioning of the mind, and the two together seem to be what we call awareness.
So it's what we were talking about earlier, where it's sort of consciousness which is enriched by feelings, sensations, and the sort of general awareness of what more there is.
Sure, very nice. Mm-hmm.
It's a very big question, but do you think we have freedom of choice? And also you talk about there's descriptions of little me and greater me, and does this issue of freedom of choice relate to those descriptions in your book?
Yes, you're getting into the thick of the book there. Yes, because among the later chapters is the question of freedom of choice. The whole thing with freedom of choice is you first need to define freedom of what or whom. And if we don't understand what self means, what I means, what you means, yes, what a person means, then there's no sense in talking about freedom of choice. Yeah? And so that's why the whole development of the chapter on the meaning of the meaning of self, or actually the meaning of the word I, comes before the question of freedom of choice. And that development of I brings to light the fact that there is I related to the conscious mind, and there is I that's related to the expanded mind. And it's in seeing a way of pinpointing the difference was to call one the little me, and the other the greater me, or something like that. And that's where the terms came in. Mm-hmm.
We may have already covered this, but what is intent, and why does it play such an important role?
That is the underlying motif or even theme of the whole book, because intent is something that has been greatly overlooked, particularly, I think, in philosophy, to a degree in psychology too. And intent is that it is what generates everything that makes sense. That I'm talking to you now. My conversation, one sentence follows another, and I hope they're coherent. Yes, there's a certain logic or development to it. Did I choose each sentence to do that? When I watch carefully, I can see, no, they popped into the mind. Suddenly, the next step came into my mind. So I'm not consciously leading where I want. Sure, I can filter what I say and take away things that aren't helpful and move towards things that are helpful. But actually, there's a sequence of thoughts popping in my mind which build the argument that I say. And so it is with everyone. And in the end of it all, I'm not responsible for that. Or not me, conscious me. So there's something that's actually working through me to make things coherent. And that is where we can start talking about intention or intent.
So that I'm clear that I understand it, you're saying that our consciousness can become aware of intent, but it can't necessarily direct it. That there's
very good, exactly. And this is also a misconception, because often we think of intent as, oh, I think of something and that's why I do it. But actually, if we look more deeply, we can see that the impulse actually to do it, beyond thinking about it, came through something else. And so there's a whole other resonance, or maybe we can call it a structure of being that is not the mind, and yet gives direction to the mind.
It reminds me of something that I think I read in the book and it relates to the previous question about freedom of choice, that is it right to say that potentially consciousness can offer almost a break in intention, a pause, so that you can get, I don't know if it's right to say, but greater access to the expanded mind. So instead of it following, I don't know if it's fair to say, it's predetermined, but that, and then potentially what we would conventionally talk about as freedom of choice is something more of almost like a pause to allow greater potential to.
It's exactly as you say, and that pause comes, and it's quite surprising why it comes. That pause comes because conscious thought interrupts intention. And in the interrupted intention, we can lose the total focus on one object and allow a whole other flux of intentions and feelings and thoughts and memories and so forth to play in to what is actually leading what we're doing afterwards. In other words, it opens out intention wider, if you want, at that moment. And it's that actually allows for the freedom to do things that come from greater me. In other words, something that's much bigger than my initial just thought of what I'm running after.
And that then sounds like it links back to what I was asking about previously about thoughts. Sometimes disturbing the mind. I mean, I'm not saying that they're always bad, but that sometimes they can effectively take over, and that if there's a way of pausing to, so that the mind it's not cluttered by thoughts.
Yes, it's often said in terms of breaking the flow.
Yeah.
As if there's a flow, and then the mind can interrupt that flow. But when you understand that what that flow is, in other words, it's intent, driving thought processes, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors. And then it becomes a little clearer what it means to interrupt the flow.
It's quite a big question,
Yes.
but what do you understand the word now to mean?
Just what you said. Time is not the big problem that it often is posed as being. In this book, I didn't include a chapter on time. Perhaps a later edition will have that. But I did include the present. The present moment is what? And the present moment we mark with the word now. And actually, when you look into it carefully, you can discover that the now is the word that says, It's the word that says, at this moment I wake up to something. In other words, I become conscious of something. And the act of becoming conscious, in other words, of conceiving something, defines the present moment.
So that means outside the present moment isn't just nothingness as we conventionally see the now as conventionally I think we see it as somewhere between the past and the future, which kind of leaves it in isolation, whereas it's an end point of a process.
Very good, yes. It leaves it in isolation, and it also reduces it to no dimension at all, as if it's the crack between the present and the future.
Yeah.
And all of this, of course, makes little sense when you know that I'm living in the present and I'm experiencing in the present, and life to me is rich in the present moment. So how can it be so rich in the present moment if it's just a crack between the past and the future? And the answer is that we are living all those experiences in the expanded mind, on a level of multiple consciousnesses, if you want to call it that. And it's when it collapses into a single item, then we say, I see something, I realize something, whatever it is, or I do something. And at that moment, you've defined the present.
And that's what we were talking about earlier, about the consciousness, not moments of consciousness not being continual, that they are actually, when you look at it more deeply, that they are discontinuous. But that again doesn't mean that they're in isolation.
Exactly. Very nice. Yeah, very nice.
Is there a difference between truth that is perceived or witnessed and the truth which is more constructed out of our own personal belief structure? or are they related?
That's a deep question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that.
Okay,
Yes,
well, maybe it's outside.
But the point of truth is what's interesting in truth is that here, when you understand the expanded mind in relationship to the conceptual mind, that means the subliminal mind in relationship to the conscious mind, that's the same thing, that allows for a different definition of truth. Because instead of having to define truth in relationship to something exterior, that's true to the world, true to what happened and so forth, we can define truth by the fact that it just comes together and forms something meaningful. So everything that forms a meaning has a truth to it. It is true. If it doesn't come together to a single concept, that means it isn't true. It didn't make it into consciousness. So it suggests a whole other way to approach the question of truth.
It's more about an integration of parts.
Exactly. Very good.
Okay. There. What is one thing you would like people to take away from reading your book? If there was one thing.
An enthusiasm for life, for meaning, yes, that we move back towards meaning in life. That we don't have to ask the question, is this meaningful or is my life meaningful and all of that. Because as soon as we realize that we're creating the meanings and the understanding that we have of everything, that it takes a mind to create an object, then suddenly we're intimately involved in life. And this can change very greatly the whole view of what my place, what an individual's place is in the overall experience of life and the universe. And I think that's that impetus. If it passes, I'm happy.